environments suitable for revenue management. So the environments that are suitable for revenue management have to satisfy several restrictions. So the first of them is that the same unit of capacity, for example, an airline seat, can be used to deliver services to different customer segments at different prices. In other words, there is an opportunity to segment customers so that different prices can be charged and the different segments are willing to pay different prices. Right? So this is an opportunity, for example, in airlines, in hotels, in many other industries. Second restriction or requirement is a high gross margin, right? So this is the case when you have very low variable cost, and so cost of additional sale is very low once you have paid the fixed cost. So, for example, imagine you invest $10 million in something, and now this is already a sunk cost or a fixed cost that has to be paid regardless whether you use the capacity or not. And now, a variable cost for every additional sale is $5 or $10 or even $1, right? And then if you sell a product for $200, great. But if you can't sell it for $200, better sell it for $100 or $50 because even $50 with a variable cost of $5 brings you an additional profit. And as long as you don't hurt your high price revenue, it's a good idea to use the remaining capacity for a lower price revenue just to increase the revenue further, right? So this is the second requirement, high gross margin. The third requirement is that the capacity is perishable, so it cannot be stored, right? Like an airline seat, right, of the plane that is flying today. It can only be used today, right? And the other thing is capacity is limited, so that all possible customers cannot always be served, right? This is another requirement, or feature of an environment that is suitable for using revenue management. The fourth requirement, very important, is that capacity is sold in advance of demand. So this is right the case, for example, in airline seats, you buy the ticket ahead of time, sometimes many days before the flight, or you reserve your hotel, you reserve your car in a car rental, and so on. And the final requirement is actually hard to define. It's somehow not illegal and also not morally irresponsible to discriminate among customers. Actually, there are many examples where companies tried to discriminate and they found out that this was opposed very vehemently by customers. For example, when Amazon tried to charge different price for the same let's say, DVD with a movie to different customers. When customers discovered that, even though the differences were, a percentage measure, just a few percent, the customers were outraged, and Amazon, I think, at least apologized at that time, and has to be very careful if they want to use some kind of revenue management techniques. So these are the five features of environments that are suitable for revenue management, but I'm going to focus for a moment longer on the high gross margins. Why are these environments with high gross margins important? So I have here a calculation that will show you how change in revenue can significantly, a small change in revenue can significantly affect the change in profit. So here are some definitions. P is for profit, R revenue, F is fixed costs, right? The large fixed costs that we normally have in the industries which are suitable for revenue management. And then M is gross margin expressed as percentage of revenue, right? So we expect gross margins to be high percentage, right, in the industries good for revenue management. And N is net profit expressed also as percentage of revenue. And of course, we can calculate profit as revenue times margin, right? Because margin is the percentage of profit, gross profit in the revenue, right? So this is like, if let's say gross margin is 75%, that means variable cost per unit is 25%. So taking revenue times margin removes the variable cost, right? And leaves us just with the profit contribution, but we also have to remove the fixed cost in order to get the profit. So this is one correct calculation, but we can also express the profit as revenue multiplied by net margin, and net margin is basically, right, how much profit we get as percentage of revenue. Right, and these are usually small because there is competitive pressure. If somebody is making a very large profit, like 50% net profit, then this is a very attractive industry, and so there will be other companies entering. If it's relatively easy to enter, there will be companies that will enter this industry, and the competition will drive net profits down. So we can now calculate the delta of the profit, delta of this P, right, from this formula. How does it change when we change revenue? So when we change revenue, there will be delta in the revenue times the margin, right? And the fixed cost doesn't change as we change revenue. So the change in the profit will be change in the revenue times the margin. Fixed costs disappear. Now, if we want a percentage change of profit, right? So this is what we are expressing here. Delta P percentage-wise is delta P divided by the profit that we started with, right? So the delta P, as we expressed here, is delta R times M, right? Delta in revenue times gross margin. And the denominator P can be expressed with this formula that was, we said this is equal to the profit. So profit will replace with revenue times net margin. And now I want you to see that there is delta R here divided by R. And that means this is again like percentage change in revenue, right? So in the numerator here, we have percentage change in revenue multiplied by gross margin and divided by the net margin or net profit as percentage of revenue. So what I want you to see is that we see that change in revenue, relative change, percentage change in revenue, will cause a change in profit, relative percentage change. However, this change will be magnified if M is large and N is small, right? N, as I said, is usually small. Percentage, the net profit as percentage of revenue is typically small because competition will drive it to become small. But gross margin sometimes is very high, sometimes is very low. So certain industries like airlines, hotels, and others have high gross margins. They have to invest a lot in their capacity in the right, and then they can offer products. Each unit of the product is sold with very small variable costs, so that means gross margin is very high. And here we have this formula calculated for different assumptions. This is table for N 2%, so net margin is just 2%. The gross margin here varies, right, from 15% all the way to 100%. 100% would be basically where we have a variable cost 0, right? And so what I want you to see, let's say, if the revenue increases by 2% and gross margin is 75% and net margin is 2%, right? It's 75% in the numerator and 2% in the denominator. So there is a big magnifying factor here, right? Then for a 2% increase in revenue, we might have 75% increase in profit, right? So that shows you, right? So you can see other numbers in this table, but that shows you a small increase in revenue can have a very big impact on the increase in profit, right? Right? For example, this is close to doubling our profit just because we increase our revenue by 2%. And this is what revenue management can help us achieve, right? If net profit is higher, then the impact is actually smaller, right? But if you have a very competitive industry like airlines, where net profits will be small, if you can just capture 5% more of revenue, which means, on a, maybe if you had a fixed price per seat, if you could increase occupancy in your aircrafts, right? Reduce the number of empty seats, increase the number of seats that you sell in an aircraft on average by 5%, you can more than double your profits, right? Just by increasing the number of tickets you sell by 5%. So, right, this is the arithmetic. This is what explains why high gross margin industries are actually very good place to use revenue management and because the benefits of revenue management can be extremely significant.